carries. You want to take my job? I'm glad to be back in Marshall County and use my time away from Washington, D.C. to have conversations with Kansans. Last weekend when home, we had a town hall meeting in Concordia and have another one the day after Thanksgiving in Clay Center. And so this may not be convenient times, at least my thought was not convenient times for people, but obviously it is. Maybe you're here despite being inconvenienced.
Absolutely.
All right, very good.
It's better than 7:30.
You're on a criticism roll here. So this is nothing that I'm unaccustomed to, and although there are more folks here than normal in a Marshall County Town Hall meeting, how many people are from Marshall County? That's a lot of people. Very good. I guess about half and half. I would remind you that my town hall meeting in Palco, in northwest Kansas, a town of 350 people, had 150 people there. 95% of them were not from Palco. And we had CNN, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times, a German television station, and I don't know that I visited with anybody from Palco that day, so I went back the next week and walked Main Street for an hour and a half. And what I discovered is that people were very happy because the local cafe sold out of chicken fried steaks that day. It was economic development. So, I'll just mention, as I usually do, a couple of things, and then we'll take the conversation wherever you'd like for it to go. The first one, and some of you are repeat visitors of mine at a town hall meeting, and I've said this, so you've heard it before, but if there's anyone in the room who's a veteran or who knows a veteran that is struggling with the VA, put us to work. When I was your congressman, for the folks in Marshall County, when I was your congressman, not your senator, I represented a congressional district larger than the state of Illinois with no VA hospital. And so what we conveyed to the VA is there are huge distances for people to go to access particularly health care in the VA. And so we were successful in getting outpatient clinics built. In your world, it's not very close. Junction City may be the closest. But for routine services, you wouldn't have to go to Wichita or Topeka or Leavenworth. And that was a bit of a fix for some people. But if you're a 94-year-old World War II veteran or somebody who has a disability in Frankfort, while it's hard to get to Topeka, it's not that much easier to get to Junction City. And so what we now have in our law is this, that if you live more than 40 miles from a VA facility, or if it takes the VA more than 30 days to provide services, that the VA must, at your choice, provide those services at home. So you could see a doctor in Marysville, for example, or be admitted to the hospital in Marysville. This, in my view, is a really good thing. It's good for veterans. It's good for community healthcare providers, because just like our schools need every student, our hospitals need every patient. But the downside has been, at least initially, the VA didn't like this law, and they've implemented it in a way that hasn't been very helpful or easy for anybody to use. It's up for reauthorization, and that debate will occur in the United States Senate. It expires when they run out of money, which is expected to be by the end of the year. And if we don't act, then that choice program goes away, which in my view, there are people at the VA who would be happy if that happened. And my goal is to make certain we don't. In fact, the Undersecretary at the Department of Veterans Affairs testified now several years ago, after choice came to be the law, that veterans don't like or want this program. And that defies, in my view, common sense. So help us make certain that that doesn't become true. If you've tried it, some of you may have been there. I had a veterans kind of town hall meeting in Marysville, I don't know, 3 months ago. We had 60 veterans there. The hospital administrator was also there, and while there was great interest by the 60 veterans who were there, the hospital in Marysville was not using choice, and we're trying to fix the reasons that would be the case, including in the reauthorization, increasing the reimbursement for critical access hospitals who take care of veterans under that program. So the demand is there. I don't want the VA to win this battle and say, see, Moran, we told you, nobody likes it, nobody wants it. We want to have success. So if you are a veteran, know a veteran who's tried or wants to try this program, help us prove to the VA that this is valuable, particularly to people in rural Kansas, but really across the state, because there's lots of interest. Yes, ma'am?
Would privatizing the VA, they're talking about that now, would that help?
The question was, would privatizing the VA be helpful? That's generally opposed by VFW, American Legion. I mean, it's a very political kind of issue. So while I can't avoid political issues, I would say that there is no value to us heading down that path till we prove that it works in the manner that we're talking about. Once we prove to the VA and to the American taxpayer, to Congress, that this choice program can work, then we can look for. And I'm generally would be concerned about privatization of the VA in the sense that there are veterans who want to be treated by other veterans and surrounded by veterans in their care. And there are certain things, traumatic brain injury, amputation, things that community hospitals and other medical centers would not have the capacity to handle. So there ought to be more choice for veterans, more community care, but I don't think it means at all replacing the VA. And it's certainly at this point, we don't have the evidence that that is a workable solution anyway. So let's make sure this one works before we take the next step, is the way I look at it. I would tell you that the example of the way the VA has implemented this law, my hometown is Plainville, north of Hayes. So a veteran calls me and says, Jerry, I'd like to, I used to tell the story this way, and you all have corrected me, because I used to say, he called me to tell me that he wanted a colonoscopy. And people said, that can't be true. So he must have said, I need a colonoscopy. So his point was that he called the VA in Wichita and said, I need a colonoscopy. I'd like to have it done at home. And the answer from the VA was, I'm sorry, sir, but you live within 40 miles of a VA facility. Hayes has an outpatient clinic, so you don't qualify. His response to the VA in Wichita was, oh, no, that's fine. I've already called the clinic in Hayes, the Veterans Clinic in Hayes. They don't do colonoscopies. The answer from the VA was, it doesn't matter, there's a clinic within 40 miles. That's the kind of stuff that should never happen to anybody, but certainly you wouldn't expect to happen to those who served our country. That's right. Now, one other topic, and this is new for those of you who are repeats to my world. I'm very worried that the administration is going to withdraw from NAFTA. And I'm worried as a Kansan. Mexico is our largest purchaser of agriculture commodities from our state. And I assume we're going to have a tax debate in part in this meeting today. But one of the points I am making to the administration and to my colleagues in Washington, D.C. is, if farmers and ranchers don't have income, it doesn't really matter what the tax rates are. And so I understand that there are problems with NAFTA, and I'm all supportive of trying to negotiate a better deal. But it appears to me that what's going to happen is that we will announce our withdrawal from NAFTA. There apparently is then a 6-month period of time in which you can continue to negotiate before it's terminated. And the administration says that we will get a better deal. And their point is that Mexico and Canada don't have any place else, particularly in agriculture, to buy agricultural products. What about Brazil? What about Argentina? What about our competitors? This is, again, I know that not everyone I represent is a farmer and rancher, but I will tell you there is not a Kansan who is not affected by the agricultural economy. And if we lose markets, particularly, I spoke in Kensington, Kansas, among other places on Veterans Day. Corn and other agriculture commodities are piled for blocks along the rail tracks. And we are in a time in which commodity prices are terribly low. The last thing that we need is less ability to sell. And sometimes even a farmer has told me over the years, I'm sick of dealing with the world, why don't we just take care of ourselves? And I understand that attitude, but the answer to that question could be, so what half of the acres that are planted to crops in Kansas do you no longer want to farm? Because 98%, 99% of the mouths to feed are not in the United States, they are outside. And so I've encouraged farmers and ranchers, farm organizations, commodity groups, they can still, and I think there may be some National Farmer Union folks here today who have some skepticism about trade agreements. You can still be skeptical, but please make certain the administration understands the importance of staying in this agreement. You know, we walked away from Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the other countries, all but us, concluded the agreement without us. And in the absence of us, that means a greater opportunity for China and other places. So, veterans, if we can help you, please put us to work. And if you can help me make the case for staying in, negotiating a better deal, but not walking away from NAFTA by lobbying your farm organizations, your commodity groups, but most importantly, the administration and members of Congress, that trade matters to Kansas, that would be very much appreciated.
And Trump doesn't understand this, Alice.
My impression, I met with the Secretary of the Treasury, and he indicates he understands this. My impression is that much of the trade discussion, I saw where the laughter was coming from. Much of the trade emphasis in this administration, the leadership on trade, comes from the Secretary of Commerce named Wilbur Ross. And we went back and listened to read his testimony when he testified in front of his confirmation hearing, and he was really saying that you don't have to worry, these are my words put in his mouth, so this is not a quote, but what he was saying was, agriculture doesn't have to worry. We understand the importance of agriculture and we're supportive, but then he went on to really indicate, but agriculture is so important to the world, I don't think you have anything to worry about. Maybe this is a strategy that works, and you say we're withdrawing from NAFTA, and that Mexico and Canada will be more likely to negotiate a better deal. That's a possibility. I can't say that it wouldn't happen, but boy, I think it's a high-risk proposal, and the consequences if we misjudge that, to Kansas and to agriculture and to the circumstances we find in a place like Frankfurt or in Plainville or the places we all come from, pretty darn damaging if we're wrong.
Yes.
So taxes, we're ready to move to taxes. Incidentally, what I've discovered about the conversation about taxes is that, and this reporter will like this because you seem rather timid. You're fine. The issue that dominates my town hall meetings is still health care. And so while taxes, and that of course then changed a bit when taxes started to include health care.
Right.
And I've argued from the beginning that taxes ought to be taxes and health care ought to be health care. And I've also argued that taxes ought to be done in a bipartisan way with Republicans and Democrats, all 100 senators. This sounds familiar. So the issue that adding health care to taxes, in addition to the policy issues around health care, there's also the issue of it diminishes the chances of us finding any kind of common ground in dealing with either one of the issues. All right, I'm ready. Yes, sir.
My name's Brandon from Manhattan, and I want to thank you first of all for being here. I know a lot of senators aren't taking the time to come and talk to us. And to show that you care really matters. And I want to start by telling you about my nephew,
Okay.
Landon. And he's 10 years old, and you'd love this kid. He's like one of these little rascals who loves science and dinosaurs and playing in the dirt and go-karts. Loves go-karts. He was also born with an underdeveloped heart.
Okay.
And he, to keep him alive, he needed a ton of specialized care. And so he was actually in a hospital in Dallas for 2 months before he was actually okay. We didn't even know if he was going to live. He had a feeding tube stuck in his abdomen. It was probably the most devastating time in my family's life. And luckily, my sister, my twin sister, had good health insurance, which she would otherwise not be able to afford if it wasn't for things like the individual mandate. And so, yet today, my sister and our family are looking at a tax cut healthcare bill that's going to result in 13 million people losing their health coverage and rates going up for millions more, on average 10% per year for the next 10 years. And so what I want to know is, are you going to stand by my sister, Landon, and my family and other people like us who are struggling with access to health insurance and oppose any tax bill that will repeal the individual mandate, that is going to raise the number of people without health insurance, or increase premiums?
I thank you for advocating on behalf of your nephew and on behalf of individuals, families who are in the circumstance of having pre-existing condition. You will not get me to answer your question the way that you'd like for me to answer your question, which is to say I fully commit to what you're wanting me to commit to.
Why not?
Why not? I mean, I'm not finished with the conversation, so I wasn't walking away from it. I want, again, I hope that we can get healthcare separated from taxes to start with. That would
You have a really good opportunity to do that.
That would then lend itself toward a broader-based discussion by all 100 senators. And I think that's important, one, because we would have different points of view and perspectives brought into the conversation, different constituencies from across the country kind of thing, different philosophies, attitudes. But most importantly, if Republicans can exclude Democrats from a debate, then the reverse can occur in the future, which is Democrats exclude Republicans from debate. And I want to be able to represent you in the next debate. So we need to figure out how we work together, and I don't think that chance is yet behind us, particularly on healthcare, nor on taxes. So, and on healthcare, here's my response, I suppose, more specifically to your question, which is, I'm interested in helping your nephew and his family. I have spent a lot of time with Kansans in this kind of setting, but in church, walking Main Street, the list is much longer than people who have the ability, time, or inclination to come and visit at a town hall meeting. My conversations with people, and I've had, people have told me, like, Jerry, I don't know why you're doing town hall, people in Washington, D.C. tell me, I don't know why you're doing town hall meetings. And those are just people who are there with a political agenda. My experience has been that the people who visit with me about healthcare, almost without exception, are not there as a Republican or a Democrat, a liberal, a progressive, whatever the words are. They're there because this issue affects their family in a very direct way. And I've had a lot of conversations with Kansans in which the tears start flowing as they describe to me the circumstances, particularly as it relates to somebody in their family with a pre-existing condition.
How does that make you feel?
It makes me feel, it makes me pleased that people are telling me their story, and it makes me want, as you would expect from almost any human being, that I want to be helpful. There's also another set of folks out there who have a conversation with me that is, Jerry, I can't afford health care. Unrelated to a pre-existing condition, people whose premiums have skyrocketed since the passage of the Affordable Care Act. And so what I've been trying to do, as I opposed the BCRA, the Republican plan in the Senate, as creating more problems than it solved. That satisfied some of you. My other votes satisfied you a lot less. But the goal has been to force Congress to come together and fix the healthcare problem in a way that threads the needle by helping people who have a pre-existing condition in their family, but also addresses the issues of people who have their premiums, a business person, an individual, particularly people in the individual market, but all Kansans are experiencing dramatic increases in premiums. And in addition to that, we've had dramatic increases in co-payments and deductibles, which most people can't afford and can't come up with the money to pay. There's 127 hospitals in Kansas. I have visited them all, many of them in light of the Affordable Care Act. I think I probably visited, I certainly visited all of them as United States Senator and visited almost all of them previously as a congressman. And the conversations there is their financial condition is no better off today than it was before the Affordable Care Act because they have so much bad debt from people who can't pay their co-payments and deductibles. So even if we have people with, a few people with, I don't want to, that sounds pejorative. Sounds like I'm making a point that I'm not trying to make. Even if we have more people who have insurance, they have insurance that they still can't afford, and they have co-payments and deductibles that they can't pay.
And isn't it interesting that this tax bill is going to make it less likely for them to be able to afford their premiums, as it's the greatest transfer of wealth that we've seen in decades.
Because of the Koch brothers. You know, when are you gonna stop talking for the Koch brothers? I am so tired of the Koch brothers taking our money and making the poor poor. I mean, if we have more hungry in our nation than ever before, but the Koch brothers are making more money, and there's the Koch brothers in our state. There's rich people in every frickin' state in our union making more money than ever before, and more poor people than ever before. That's what I'm so disgusted with. What is your vision for America? Why are we spending $700 billion on our military while we have more poor people? When are we gonna stop fighting?
My vision for America is the opportunity for everybody to have a chance at pursuing the American dream.
We're not.
Wherever they start in life.
Why don't we have a medical system like Europe and Canada and Mexico?
And most other
Yes.
nations. How many
God.
nations?
Yes, ma'am? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir. I did talk to you first.
Yes,
Then
sorry.
you, ma'am.
My name is Christopher Renner. I was born in Axtell. I was baptized here at the Catholic Church. I grew up in Beatty. I lived down in Manhattan. My mother worked at the Community Memorial Hospital.
You've proven your
Yeah,
local
and,
credentials.
well, I'm going to get, my mother's story is what I want to bring up here. My mother worked at Community Memorial from 1959 until she retired in 1992, okay? People in this room, she probably helped deliver, all right? My mother was diagnosed with cancer in 1994 and died in 1997. Thanks to Medicare, my family did not have to pay for her care. In this tax bill that the Republicans are putting forth, it's cutting $45 billion from Medicare. I'm 61. I want to retire in 4 years. Will Medicare be there for me so if I get sick, I will be covered? Since I paid the taxes my whole life? That's my question.
First of all, I come from a circumstance in which I understand the value of Social Security and Medicare to my family, to my parents. And my parents lived until their 90s, and Medicare was a significant component of their ability to access health care and to have quality health care. I have begun the argument on this topic. It took me a minute to catch up with what does taxes have to do with Medicare. The answer to that question, as best as I can tell, is that the tax reductions are of a magnitude that increases the debt beyond what is allowed. So, so automatic cuts then take place. I'm opposed to automatic cuts. I'm opposed to particularly automatic cuts that would affect Medicare. But generally, I just think Congress needs to make the decisions about how to spend money, and across-the-board cuts are an irresponsible way of dealing with fiscal challenges that our country faces. So the argument that I am having with my colleagues is we surely can figure out how to have a tax plan that doesn't go to the extent that we have pay-go rules kick in and across-the-board cuts come into play.
I think they
We can-
want that. Frankly, I think that's exactly what they want.
I don't know that I have the ability to argue with you. I don't think that's the case. It's certainly not what I want. Medicare, Social Security are significant components. This president, incidentally, indicated in his campaign that he didn't want to touch any of the entitlement programs, Medicare.
Well, what difference does that make? He lies all the time.
I'm not defending anyone here. I'm just saying that there are people who at least, I understand the value of Medicare, and I also understand just process-wise, good government-wise, across-the-board cuts are not the way to handle you don't make smart decisions. What that says is that every program has equal value. If we're going to reduce spending, We ought to do it in a way that is thoughtful. There are things that ought to get more money. Incidentally, from my perspective, this may be of interest to you, is increasing the funding for the National Institute of Health so we can find the cure
Yes,
for
absolutely.
cancer. We can find the treatment for Alzheimer's related onset. There are things that we should spend more money on, things we should spend less money on, and some things, in my view, we should spend no money on. But that doesn't happen if the solution to everything is across the board cuts. So I am an advocate for trying to fashion the tax bill in a way that what you described doesn't happen, and that there would not be across the board cuts, not just on Medicare, but on other items as well.
The PAYGO
Yep.
rules would also cut farm subsidies.
That's true. Yes, ma'am.
Will you withhold your vote then?
This lady needs to talk, she's been trying a long time.
I am Julie Woodliff, and I live in Frankfurt. And I have a comment and I have a question for you, Mr. Moran.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, my comment is about veterans and about their care. Reimbursement was brought up to my husband, who is a veteran. However, hospitals and healthcare providers don't understand it, have never heard of it, and are loath to implement it or even do it. You should just know that.
And you lost me when you used the word reimbursement. As what are you telling me?
Well-
What don't hospitals and providers understand?
They don't understand that it's possible for a veteran who lives over 40 miles away from the VA, which we obviously do, to go to a healthcare provider, especially to an emergency room, and get the care, coordinate with the VA, and get the care reimbursed.
Okay.
They don't understand it, they've never heard of it, and, you know, they're not happy to do it, they're not happy to hear about it. You should just know that.
You are confirming what I said earlier.
Yes.
All right?
I just wanted to confirm that, and then my question for you is completely unrelated.
Let me, before you do that, let me say one thing that's important for people to know about the choice program is it requires prior authorization. You can't just show up at the hospital or the doctor's office and then submit the bill to the VA, which goes back to, further taking a program in a further private way. That's not what this is. You've got to have authorization in advance, and
There
don't
needs
go
to
there
be
and
more
expect.
clarification among healthcare providers and patients about that then.
The VA refuses them to.
Yeah, the VA isn't really knowledgeable about it either.
Okay.
That's a problem. And then my question for you is completely unrelated.
All right.
What is your position on Ajit Pai and his ideas about net neutrality?
Thank you.
Uh,
Thank you.
What I know about the proposal that's coming from the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, first of all, I should tell you that Ajit Pai I know well. He's a Kansan, and I appreciate him because he has an understanding of rural America. And
He's not showing it.
he has an understanding of rural America, and we've worked well with him in trying to get broadband deployed to places in Kansas and across the country that would not otherwise have access to those services.
Until recently?
When it's still true. But I don't know, I got an email last night with an article and an outline of what he's talking about. I haven't read it yet. I just got home last night. I'm not supportive of having companies throttle and whatever the other words are, narrow the options that consumers have. I don't think that this is, in my view, and this is a process issue, this is an example of where the FCC did something that Congress was supposed to do. That's a policy to be decided by members of Congress. And I said that when the FCC put the policies in place that it has today. And I would say that to the FCC Commission today this is an issue for Congress to work on, not for an administration, either Obama or Trump, to make decisions that are being potentially made by the FCC. I don't mean me personally, it's my job. It's Congress's job to do these things, this is, in my view, another overreach. And I tried to be consistent in my views on this. So I'm critical of the Obama administration's FCC. Tom Wheeler was the chairman then, of going in the direction they went in because it's not their job, it's Congress's, and the same would be true today. So I need to read what he's proposing, but we'll be very involved in this topic, and I serve on the Commerce Committee that has jurisdiction over the Federal
Are you
Communications
telling
Commission.
me that you have not read what he's proposing?
Yes,
Wants to give it to the corporations.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moran.
I am telling you that. Yes, sir. I won't forget your name.
So, my name's David Brocksterman. I'm originally from Axel. I live in Manhattan now, and my little sister actually goes to school at
You
Frankfurt
all
High
don't
School.
have to convince me
So-
that you're local. I didn't mean to send
Just so
the
everyone
names
else
that
knows.
way. All right.
So, I'm going to talk about taxes again, but I wanted to just point out a couple things first to kind of get your perspective. So, I was trying to research the tax bill to see the differences between the House bill that was just approved and then the Senate bill. From what I can understand on the Senate bill, it cuts the corporate tax rate down to 20% from 35%. 43% of the tax cuts will affect households making over $200,000 a year. The tax cuts for individual citizens expire, but the corporate cuts don't. It eliminates the alternative minimum tax, which is only there to make sure that the richest individuals in the country don't use loopholes to completely avoid paying tax. This would also have saved Trump a lot of money, by the way. Doubles the exemption for the estate tax, which only helps the richest. It repeals the deduction for the state on your state and local taxes. Our current unemployment rate is at 4.5%. I hear the argument a lot that these are supposed to stimulate the economy. Corporations will reinvest in hiring, which doesn't make sense to me. I think they'll just buy back stock. And it cuts $65 billion from Medicare. So I guess, explain to me the justification for why you would want to vote for this tax bill, knowing that it would overwhelmingly help corporations and not really help individuals from Frankfurt and Marshall County. So, I'd like to hear your thoughts.
I will be, I don't know what the tax bill in the Senate's going to look like. What we have is a tax plan. There's no legislative words on paper, but we have the broad outlines of what the Senate Finance Committee is reporting out of their committee. I am a supporter of tax reform or tax cuts, and to the chagrin of some of you, I'm a supporter of reducing corporate tax rates. I do believe that there are taxes you can cut that will stimulate the economy. I believe there are tax cuts that you can make that will not. And the issue is which ones will do that and which ones don't. And that's, to me, the issue that is yet to be determined by me, and I don't hold myself as an expert, but the experts. And I come to this, I'm a Kansan, I live here, I know the debate and discussion that's gone on in our state. I know there's a lot of skepticism about job growth, but in my view, the reality that our tax code that corporations pay is so much higher than other countries has a consequence on where those countries locate. I've been in town hall meetings in which people come to me and say, punish those companies for leaving the country and taking jobs with them.
They don't pay any taxes.
I'm not for, it's not about punishing a company, it's about getting our system in place in which we level the playing field so there's not an incentive to leave the United States. So I will be accused by some of helping wealthy people. The goal, I have little interest in helping wealthy people. People are people, I like them all. But I would say that the goal is not in any way to help somebody because they happen to have money. The goal is to increase what I call the American dream. And by that I mean more jobs, better jobs, higher paying jobs. We want economic growth. And I hate when an elected official, Republicans in particular, talk about economic growth. It sounds like something that doesn't affect any of us. Economic growth to me is there are more jobs, better jobs, higher paying jobs, and more secure jobs. And so we need a tax code that reflects the circumstance. It's like, let me say this about Kansas, and I leave Kansas issues to, I don't want state legislators and telling me how to do my job, and so I try not to spend a lot of time telling them what to do. But I know that we have to have a tax code in Kansas that allows us to be competitive with other states, but particularly Nebraska and Missouri and Oklahoma and Colorado, those who surround us. But I would tell you from my experience as a Kansan, as a community citizen, as a community leader, as a member of Congress, I worked on lots of efforts to bring business to our state. The number one issue is not taxes. The number one issue is tell us about your education system. Tell us about how your workforce is trained. Tell us that you have people who want to work, are motivated to show up. Tell us about the skill set that people have in your state. Taxes is a component of a business making a decision, but the most important thing is
sorry.
You had him.
Senator,
right.
let's have a quick comment.
All right.
Okay, so my name is Nate Faflick. I'm an undergraduate at Kansas State University studying human development and family sciences. I have the personal mission and goal to try and support people that are living in the most marginalized community. I work with your office on some anti-poverty legislation for global poverty issues as well as domestic poverty
Nate
issues.
is explaining to you who he is because I know Nate.
Please stand up.
Okay. So one of my concerns with the current proposed tax bill is that it will make scholarships as well as assistantship for graduate programs taxable, and that is a reality that a lot of students are going to have to consider when deciding between, am I going to pursue higher education in an already stratified education world and world of education, or am I going to continue to work to pay off my student loans? So my question is, are you going to support a tax bill that's going to make higher education more difficult for students to achieve, or one that's going to make it more possible?
Nate, the way you asked your question, how can I say that I'm going to make your life and others more difficult? Certainly not my goal.
That's the choice.
That's not the choice. This is not yes or no yet.
No. It's clear implications for this bill.
So, you're telling me something that I only knew part of, which is the issue of student debt, of the deductibility of student interest. You're telling me that this takes this a step further,
Yes.
Dealing with salaries or income that
It's not salaries, though.
No, it doesn't allow school teachers to deduct what they spend on supplies.
My guess is this is the
It's the House bill.
version.
It is the House
Got it.
bill. But
But this is kind of related to this gentleman's question, which is, I told you what I want to accomplish, and it's mostly on the business side. My thought from the very beginning was that Congress wouldn't touch the individual side. So these issues of what's deductible or not, I didn't expect us to have. The tax code for individuals would stay the same. We'd try to fix the problem of the disparity between corporate rates abroad and here.
But that's how you pay for the tax cuts for corporations, is you have to do
Yeah.
that on the
yeah,
other end.
and that's the problem. They take
That
things
is
away.
that is not the way it has to be done.
That's the way
Well,
they
that's
are
the way
doing
they're
it.
doing
And
it.
again, the Senate version, with the exception of property taxes and sales tax, local taxes, state taxes, not estate, but state taxes, we don't deal with the deductions, which I think makes the Senate bill a better version than the House bill. I don't know where this ends up yet, but this is an issue that matters to me. And again, our plan, my thought was, the tax code for individuals is what it is. I guess, I mean, I'd be happy if we could simplify it, but that isn't happening in this plan.
That's always
No.
reality.
No, it never will.
But Senator, you're gonna vote on this before Christmas, and there's a lot about this bill you don't know yet, you said so yourself today, so why is this?
There's no rush.
Why is this, we're being rushed through like this?
I'm not for rushing it through, Jim.
You want to
Thank
have
you.
a government say no, gosh.
Speak for decency. Speak for decency.
Here's the, we've had this conversation, here's the challenge. I'm for a tax code change. I'm for changing the healthcare system. And so I'm for some things. I am for some things. It's not that I'm opposed to doing either one of the things. The question is how we do it. And I care about the end result, the policy, but I also care about the process. And I can tell you that I will have no influence if I take me out of the debate in Washington, D.C. We have a lot of work to do, and it ought not happen overnight, and it ought to happen in a bipartisan way.
You could take your vote out of it. You could have some pretty good impact by voting against this thing, and that's your voice.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes, sir. Oh, I still forgot you. Yes, sir. I really forgot. I won't leave till we talk.
You've been taking a lot of heat. My name is Dennis Osborne. On your Veterans Choice Program, your plus 40, you call Senator Moran's office in Wichita. You ask for Mike. I called Mike here a week ago. I had called down to VA. and the lady says, Dennis, I can't help you, you need to call, I got transferred. I talked to that person I was on the phone for an hour and a half.
Wow.
I got transferred 5 times. Guess who the 5th person was I talked to?
Mike?
No.
He's not at the VA.
I talked to the lady who said, Dennis, I can't help you. Yeah. In the beginning.
Oh.
I got a hold of Moran's office, Mike knows I'm an asshole. And somebody else in that office knows it too, because we don't get along. I don't agree with everything Senator Moran says or does, but what he's done for me as a Choice 40 man has been great. You've had problems, is that right? Can't get on, you've said piss on it. The budget for 2018, I believe, is 186 billion, that's a B, dollars. Supposedly there are, and now, guess where all this information comes from. Supposedly there are 21 million veterans, of which 69% use the Veterans Administration. $186 billion. The organization is so big that Senator Moran and his people cannot control them.
That's right.
That they are a huge, I have so damn many phone numbers for the VA in my pocket, it is totally confusing. The local hospital, I don't know if Curtis is here or not. Curtis doesn't like me.
Sure I do.
He and I just had a conversation yesterday, and we're agreeable. The VA's a damn mess, a total mess. You think government's a mess, you ain't seen nothing until you deal with the VA. They are turning people away to die all the time. You get a hold of Jerry Moran's office, talk to Mike in Wichita. Remember, $186 billion in the VA. And it's where in the hell's it going? He doesn't know. You know, and I don't hold that against you. It's just a mess.
The VA is a
People like him can't
huge bureaucracy.
use it. Pardon?
The VA is a huge bureaucracy, and what I'm taking your words a bit further to say, the problem at the VA is not lack of money. In fact, the amount of money that goes to the VA has increased dramatically. President Obama indicated that the largest increase in any agency's funding during his administration was the VA. It's not that we're not providing them money, it's that they are bureaucratic. For most of my time, and for all of my time in Congress, the VA has had problems. For most of the time that I've been in Congress, the VA's problems were trying to be addressed by the VA. But over the last several years, my view is that they've kind of just shrugged their shoulders. They don't know what to do either. It's just beyond them. Now, what you say, I would defend the VA in this regard. I was in Leavenworth yesterday, and there the gentleman told me that the VA in Leavenworth, everything he knows about it is they're treating veterans very well. There are people who are very satisfied with the services they get. My goal is to make sure that no one slips through the cracks.
And us out here, that are 40 milers or
Correct.
through it. He doesn't want to use it. He's tired of it.
But, yes, sir.
Okay, my name's Ross Allen. I would just reiterate thanks for coming out here. I know this is not a fun place to be necessarily. So, anyway, I'm grateful for it. The other couple things I'd just say quick thank yous for. One, my dad works for Community Healthcare Services. I'm in Onega and then in Holton. And that visit and you investing in healthcare providers is really valuable. Not actually going to talk about healthcare. I know that's a big thing for a lot of folks, but I'm good conversation. I just want to focus on taxes. The second thing I was going to say thanks for is with veterans folks. I took 5 honor flights with World War II vets throughout my high school career, and I can just tell you, it means a lot for those guys that you're looking out for them. So I'm really grateful that you're here. I'm grateful that you care about the things you do.
When I get a compliment, it's usually followed by the word but.
No. It's not a but. It's not a but. So I also realized I probably sat on the wrong side of the room as someone who's helped Republicans get elected both at national and state levels. So I avoid the hisses. But the couple things I just from my background, I studied economics at K-State. I interned with Lynn Jenkins, and then I helped with her campaign team as a county person in Kansas. Then also worked with Richard Carlson and others in Kansas. Care a lot about both economics, and like a lot of other Kansans, I've invested a lot of trust in the Republican Party. And so I think part of my background is as soon as I got out of school, two big priorities for me. One was getting out with no debt. The second was finding a job that was going to help me be able to take care of myself. And I'm really blessed to be able to say that that's been possible for me. I work two jobs currently to make ends meet. I work 60 hours a week, but I'm able to live within my means, and I'm able to live without any debt. You know Dave Ramsey.
Yes.
Okay, that philosophy, right? That's that.
I don't know Dave Ramsey, but I know of Dave.
Oh, well, sure. No, that's fair. But I mean, that's the philosophy for me, is that and it goes beyond just like a practical thing. For me, it's moral commitment to live within my means, and to if I don't have the money, I don't spend it.
I know where this conversation is
I know.
going.
And so, well, and I'm not going to hold you accountable for the House bill because you didn't have anything to do with that. But I mean, from what I'm reading in the Washington Post, and I love Kansas Public Radio, but it's not NPR, it's not New York Times, anything like that. Just from the Washington Post, what I've read is that it's going to increase the deficit by 1.3 to 5 trillion dollars. I know there's, well, I mean, yeah, that part. But then the second part, and this is maybe too wonky for folks, but my biggest concern with this whole thing, and I'm told that the Senate bill is going to keep this part, would be that the international tax rate would stay at 0, and that effectively for multinationals that earn income other places wouldn't be charged any taxes on it,
that's right.
and then they'd be able to repatriate, that earned income in the United States. I know we tried that in 2004, and it didn't work out super well for us. And so for me, I think values that the reason I've invested so much time in getting these Republicans elected throughout my life, sorry, but like I have, but was for keeping jobs, and I know that's a commitment you share, and making sure that we can be fiscally responsible. And I know that's, again, a commitment you share. Because I'm sorry, but if I wanted to kill jobs or add $1 trillion to the deficit, I would have voted for a Democrat, you know? I'm sorry, but what I'm saying is that everything I've seen in the GOP tax bill up to this point doesn't honor those commitments to being fiscally responsible and to protecting American jobs. And so I guess just what I'm hoping for is just understand where you're coming from on those things, and if you're willing to kind of commit to really fight for zero deficit increase on whatever the new tax bill is, and avoiding killing jobs. And I know that's kind of abstraction, we're not sure, but what can you help us out?
Thank you for what you have said. And thank you for your principles and the way that you live your own life and the way you would expect government to live itself. So the issue to me, and I said this, we headed down this path earlier and didn't get too far, but in my view, there are tax cuts that actually help the economy grow, and there are tax cuts that don't. And the question is, can we figure out what those are and be supportive of the ones that grow and be not supportive of the ones that are much less likely to create job growth and economic opportunity, the circumstances that we want everybody to be in that you just described. And the question is about something called dynamic scoring.
Sure. Yeah.
How do you figure out what economically does create more economic activity and pays for itself?
Yeah.
And how do you figure out which ones don't? And I have some ideas about that, but it'd be nice to get that conversation out of the political realm, which is the belief by many Republicans that every tax cut benefits that way, and Democrats who believe that no tax cut believes that way. I find myself once again using the phrase, how do you thread the needle to figure out what's the answer to that question? The answer at the moment, based upon what the Senate Finance Committee has passed, is, and this it goes back to this question about sequestration or across-the-board cuts. We've got to get our tax cuts to the magnitude that we're not increasing the debt, but still give credit for those tax cuts that increase economic activity and therefore drawing more taxes. Before the committee passed its bill, I had this conversation with the Republican members of the committee, and their story to me was, we are assuming a 0.4% increase in growth of the economy. That seems achievable to me. That doesn't frighten me. But if we get to the point in which we're assuming a 2, 3, 4, 5% increase as a result of these tax changes, then I'm very skeptical about
That's
that.
we're banking on.
So, right. So the question is, how much growth do we get from tax cuts? Some Kansans are very skeptical based upon the experience that we've had, but again, so, yet to be determined as to what that right number is.
Yeah. But, I mean, is it, just from your end, is the commitment you're trying to get toward is zero deficit? We're just trying to understand, is it as close as we can to zero deficit increase?
Minimal increase in the deficit is a safe way, I think, for me to say that.
And zero is a total number, I appreciate, sorry.
And acknowledgement that some economic growth will occur if we are actually addressing the right tax issues.
Okay.
It's never worked.
Senator Moran, in
Never
Kansas.
worked.
Never worked. Never
Yes,
worked.
ma'am.
Oh, thank you so much.
Welcome home.
Thank you. I am not from Marshall County, but I do know Sarah, and I've been to Marshall County plenty of times, and I think it's a lovely county.
Thank you.
I'm not from Marshall County either, and I know Sarah.
Sarah's well known. I wanted to discuss a little bit about strategy, and far be it for me to give you some political advice, but listening to this discussion.
But you're going to.
Yes, I'm
All right.
going to. This is what I'm struck by. I really, number one, I want to say, first, I know you to be a very decent person. I have always appreciated, and in this current year, very much appreciate your commitment to ongoing dialogue with Kansans and holding town meetings. It really matters, and there aren't many that are doing it, and you are. What you're doing for the VA is extraordinarily important for our country, and you're absolutely right on NAFTA. When I hear you talk about your goals and values related to the tax plan, it all resonates with me. But here's what I have to say I know is going to happen. There is going to be a rush vote. It's going to happen at 2 in the morning. There's going to be an agreement between the House and the Senate. There's not going to be a conference committee. And the things you're concerned about are not going to get discussed openly in any way, and you're going to have enormous pressure on you to stick with the party and vote for it. And I feel like this is one of the most cynical bills I've seen in a long time. It clearly the worst things it does out into the future. So that for politicians today, they can get held harmless, and the people who then get the anger pointed to them maybe weren't even there to vote for it. I truly believe it is a horrible bill. So here comes the strategy. You are clearly one of the people that is known to have concerns. And those are the only people who have strategy and leverage in this process. And to the extent you are concerned about NAFTA, we know this administration doesn't care about facts. They're not listening to any of that. But the president does want to get his own way, and you have leverage on that issue too because of where you stand on the tax issue. And what I would ask is that you use your leverage to the maximum to benefit Kansans and the people who are in this room.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am?
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Caitlin Broderick. I'm actually a new Kansan. I'm just starting a PhD program at Kansas State in the biology department.
Welcome.
And one of the reasons that I'm here is that you know, we spend a lot of time teaching and preparing to teach, and for that we get a tuition stipend, which for me, as somebody who was out of state, is upwards of $15,000. And so under the new tax bill, they want to tax me on that income, which I never see. It's just a tuition waiver. It's just that I don't have to pay that. So the amount of income that I would pay taxes on would increase by $15,000 for really no reason whatsoever. And I don't care whether you're Democrat or Republican. That just doesn't make any sense. And so I feel like that's something that not a lot of people have talked about, but really it harms higher education in Kansas. That's, you know, the reason that I came here is to do research at Kansas State. And I wouldn't be able to do that if I were taxed this way.
Message received, and I agree with you. It doesn't make any sense, and I'm a former graduate teaching assistant myself.
Okay.
So understand what you're talking about is the benefit comes in tuition, not in a salary.
Yes.
You'd be taxed on something that you never have income to pay.
Absolutely.
Message
So-
received. Thank you.
Thank
Well, thanks, Jerry. Curtis Hawkinson, Administrator at Community Memorial in Marysville. Do appreciate all the support for rural healthcare. I know you're in our corner and fighting every day for us. A couple of things. The Critical Access Hospital Program came into being in 1997, and the program was established to help to maintain communities and their rural hospitals. The program has worked pretty well up until like the last 5 years or so when they started pulling the thread on some of the reimbursement parameters around critical access hospitals. Of course, we got the Medicare sequester that reduces our cost-based reimbursement. We also participate in the 340B program, which is a very important program that helps us serve our underserved and uninsured residents in our county. Recently, the House Ways and Means Committee, I guess through bipartisan, we have these extender programs that relate to the hospital industry that have to be reauthorized every year. Well, one of the things that they put in there to help pay for that was to change the reimbursement for our extended care or swing bed program. And if that goes through, I mean, that would definitely be a death knell to many of our rural hospitals in the Midwest. And if they take that away, it's going to be dramatic to the rural hospitals.
Again, message received. Curtis, I would use your comments to highlight in this healthcare conversation that we've been having. I suppose theoretically it's possible to make healthcare affordable or more affordable, but it doesn't matter if you don't have access to healthcare. And so decisions that are made that would affect whether or not Marshall County has a hospital are a significant component, should be a significant component of any kind of conversation about the payment of premiums and the cost of healthcare. I haven't said this yet this morning, but this has been true for a long time, but long before Obamacare or Affordable Care Act came into play, there was a plan you'd never heard about, and which I labeled the Moran 10-point plan. And in my view, the mistake that we're making, whether it's the Affordable Care Act or the Republican plan to repeal and replace, is before we get to the position of trying to figure out who pays, why don't we figure out why it costs so much to begin with?
Yes.
And we ought to be
Yes.
dealing with the underlying costs. Otherwise, all we're doing is transferring healthcare costs to somebody else who can't afford it. And so I suppose maybe the easy way of looking at it is to say that, we're going to have insurance for everybody. And there'll be the people in the crowd. I shouldn't have gone down this path. There'll be people that, there you go. But the point is, if you don't have access to health care because your community hospital is still there, and if that new system that's supposed to provide health care for everybody can't afford it either, we never get out of this till we address why does health care cost a lot of money in the first place. And that's where I thought the debate should have been years ago. It's where I think the debate ought to be today. And it's things like prescription drugs, the amount of time that a patent exists for a drug company to have exclusive right. How do they go about keeping generics out of the market to keep the price up?
The AMA?
The lawsuits is a factor. The amount of, it's billions of dollars that are spent by providers who do tests that are not medically necessary, but are taken because if they get sued, then they've said, I've done everything possible. You can't win this lawsuit. It's what we talked about, investment in medical research, in which we find the cure to cancer. We delay the onset of Alzheimer's. That is billions of dollars we're going to be spending caring for people in difficult and dying circumstances. And the solution is out there. If we invest in graduate students who are in biology, for example.
On that point, it doesn't sound like the solution is in this tax care bill.
It doesn't sound like the solution is in the healthcare bills that have been in front of Congress
Or
at
the
the time.
tax bill.
But now that they're combined, I'm not disagreeing with you. It's just,
Okay.
I hope we
Okay.
separate.
So just to point
I
out,
hope that
here,
we separate.
summarize, this is all again more reasons coming out of your mouth not to vote for this tax
Right.
care bill, or any version that looks like it.
Yes. And not to rush it through.
Is Alexander Murray, is that bill dead?
No. And that's one of the things that's developing as a result of the repeal of the individual mandate, is that it may be paired with Alexander Murray to stabilize. Alexander Murray is an effort to stabilize the current insurance system. It's been described as a bailout to insurance companies, when what generally I would describe it as is support for people who pay premiums to be able to afford their premiums. So it's trying to keep Blue Cross and Blue Shield and other insurance companies in business in all these uncertain times in which, in the absence of everybody being required to buy insurance or to provide health care, there's stabilization for those. Again, it helps the insurance companies be stable, but the money actually goes to people who pay premiums.
It's a bipartisan compromise. Do you
Right.
support it, Senator?
I've indicated that with that kind of plan is what we ought to be doing. So,
Good, good.
I don't know where I was going, but on the you all are. I'm not getting older. It's just that you can distract me easily. It's not that the brain doesn't work.
So, so the Ways and Means Committee, if they've got that in their, and it goes along with the extenders that get authorized, does the CMS have the absolute ability then to go ahead and start reducing those rates or changing them without Congress approval on that specific line item?
My impression is that CMS does not have the authority to do that without congressional approval, but it caught my interest that they thought they had the ability to do something with 340B without congressional authorization. Fortunately, it doesn't appear to be damaging to critical access hospitals, but the idea that CMS is making decisions, it goes back to what I don't know that I ever impress anybody by telling you that I think process matters. That sounds like politics. But the process we go through, and to be a critic of the Obama administration for executive orders and overreach and more rules and regulations, we need to make sure it doesn't matter who the president is. The same theory, the same process ought to apply.
Exactly.
And if we have a process that was created a long time ago that, over a long period of our country's history, works well. It's the envy of the world.
It was.
Apparently.
It was.
So we need to make certain that we don't lose that.
Because we are losing that.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm Jordan Fiber, and I work for the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network.
You work in this conversation perfectly. Hello,
Yes.
Jordan.
So the Senate tax plan would repeal the individual mandate, which we've heard a lot about today, and that would be very detrimental to the cancer community. It would increase premiums for older and sicker Kansans, and younger, healthy people would skip out on coverage. So my organization is asking that you ask Senator McConnell to strip that out of the bill so that they are separate.
Okay.
Is that something you would do?
I would answer that question by saying that I have already encouraged the leadership of the Senate to deal with health care in one bill and taxes in another bill.
As it gets that specific, would you ask him to take it out?
Well, I want to see how this develops. I don't know what you're asking me.
Strip out the individual mandate, so that's
that-
no longer in the equation for the tax.
That
plan.
request on my part has already been made. I've
Okay.
argued that the individual mandate should be dealt in a health care debate,
Okay.
not in a tax debate.
Have you made
Okay.
that a condition of your support in your discussion?
She didn't ask that question.
No, but it's a good question.
Yes, ma'am.
It's a good
I have
question.
not made my
Thank you,
support of
Jim. It's a
anything
good question.
conditional. Yes, ma'am.
Senator Brian, again, I'd like to thank you for coming to us today. I'm changing the topic a little bit from what we've talked about today to something you mentioned a little bit ago, and that has to do, excuse me, with an educated workforce being able to come to Kansas. I've been in education for 35 years. I've lived in Marshall County and taught here in the school systems from the majority of those years. And I have a couple things that I find very instrumental in the future of our country, as well as the future of Kansas, and Marshall County as being one of those areas. And that's the cost of going into education to be a teacher. The average beginning salary in Kansas is $37,000. The average debt across all areas is between $35,000 and $50,000. If you go into education, you can't afford to be part of the workforce, and in particular, career and technical education, which is the area that I've been in the 35 years. So one of my comments would be if you would please look at a holistic view of education as a career field and how it's impacted by FAFSA and the reimbursement strategies that are in place. But I'd like you to talk a little bit about if you have any insight into the Senate version of the Perkins reauthorization, because that bill that will be at some point coming before the Senate does impact both the high school and the post-secondary training programs, and in particular, the teachers of that. So if you could speak a little bit to that, I appreciate it.
Thank you for the topic. And, first of all, the point that you make, I would want to reiterate, which is there is, other than parents, there's no person who influences the future of our country more than an educator. And they matter. We need good teachers. You ask somebody, and I've done this myself, who's made a difference in your life? I'm speaking at a high school graduation. No one ever says my senator, not once. What they will say, if it's not mom and dad, it's a teacher, and they'll have a specific, and each of us probably could do that. I can tell you about Mabel Pruder, my 4th grade teacher. I won't. And most education decisions are made at state and local level. The federal government is less involved. I believe that's correct, the way it should be. I want fewer decisions made in Washington, D.C. I think education is so important that I want decisions made here, not there. And one-size solution in Washington, D.C. doesn't fit all problems. And again, we rural folks have perhaps the most to lose in decisions being made in Washington, D.C. than made at home. I have a particular view that we underemphasize technical and vocational education. A lot of what I'm about in asking Kansans to give me the opportunity to represent them is how do we keep rural America, and incidentally for the folks from Manhattan or from Johnson County or Topeka in the Washington, D.C. world, you're rural. You may not think that of yourselves in our state, but you are. And how do we keep rural America alive? And one of the things that can happen is if we would quit telling our kids to be successes, that they have to go away someplace far away to go to school and someplace far away to pursue a career. And the best place that we can find ways to improve Marshall County by keeping our kids here is in technical vocational education. I visited more than 40 schools, but mostly high schools last year. So I wander through schools, used to talk to a government class, and I got tired of the guys sitting there with their arms folded staring at me. And so I asked the student body leaders, the student body president or whoever, to give me a tour of their school and show me what's important to them, what they like and don't like. And secondly, show me how you're pursuing career education. I was concerned that we were underemphasizing, as I said. My visits to 40 schools last year in Kansas demonstrate to me that this has changed a lot. Career and career paths are significantly emphasized, and my impression is that you would know better than I, but we are improving that circumstance. Perkins is a role that the federal government now plays in providing money for vocational education to our community colleges and to our public schools, and it has not been reauthorized. It's in front of the committee that Jim was asking or mentioning about Lamar Alexander's Education Committee. It's also health.
Senator Murray's involved in that.
Senator Murray, Senator Alexander are she's the ranking Democrat and he's the chairman of the committee. And we've been, in fact, I signed a letter within the last few weeks to the senators asking them to proceed to get Perkins reauthorized. And I think that will happen. I don't understand exactly the opposition to its reauthorization, but Senator Alexander is apparently using it as an attempt to reform some things. And I may be interested in that reform and I may not. That'll be determined by input from you and others about what it is that his goals are, and if they were achieved, would things be better. But we will continue to work to see that Perkins gets reauthorized sooner rather than later. And again, to give you the opportunity, you made a broader point about teachers and income.
And I didn't mean that necessarily from an income issue. I meant it from a affordability of picking that as a career choice. And I think even at the federal level, there is some guidance that you can give for the FAFSA for teachers in particular, and the reimbursement of, not reimbursement, excuse me, the repayment of the school loans. That a $50,000 debt to start off as a teacher and you're making $37,000 in income is just not doable. And so we see a teacher shortage in the nation, in Kansas in particular is one of those. And in career and technical education, we also see a tremendous need for teachers. And when you talk to students, one of the biggest pushbacks they say is I can't afford the loans once I get done with being a teacher. And I don't know how many people in this room maybe thought of teaching, there's of you that are young, but decided to just write that off because of the income to debt ratio. So if I could have a request, and that would be to look into the FAFSA process and the reimbursement, and in particular look at teachers, because if you want to grow economy and you want to grow rural America as well as urban, and you want to grow the workforce, it's to invest in your educators.
The cost of education in and of itself, perhaps aside from just the profession of teaching, it's a consequence to Marshall County attracting a physician. The debt that in one of the Moran 10-point plans now, a long time ago, was we need more providers, more PAs, more physicians. That would help spread them around, but education is so expensive that many physicians will make a decision that they need to be in a bigger place that pays more money, not necessarily because that's what they want to do, but because of the cost associated with paying back student debt. And we ought to be looking at how we make education. I know we got a Manhattan K-State contingency in the room. I've often wondered, why do we have student breaks like we have today? What if we could get through school in 3 years instead of 4 years?
Or just make it free.
There is. I understand the point. Yes, ma'am. All right.
When you're educating anyone, especially needing a 4-year or more degree, you're not educating them for a job they're going to have tomorrow. You're educating them for a job that's going to transition and change over 40 years or more. And so the length of time, I'm not saying there might be some, and don't kill me, people in the room, but I think there may be some liberal arts particular courses that we didn't find valuable as undergraduates as much that could be revisited. But I think as far as the education component, we know there's research that proves you have to have methodology as well as content knowledge. And that's where I would be fearful when we say comments like, can we graduate in 3 years? So I think we have to look long-term, excuse me, and kind of visionary in this area. And I am more than willing to help any way I can. One of my past students, Trent Kennedy, and so I just really appreciate the time you're giving to this.
Well,
thank you.
First of all, to say I'm a liberal arts graduate, so you've put me in my place.
I need to leave.
No, but I didn't express myself very well, maybe because I'm a liberal arts graduate. But it's not just about reducing. Okay, it's not just about reducing the period of time. What I meant to say is, why do we have 2 months off in the summer? Why do we have a month off at Christmas, holidays? Is there a more valuable way? And I told you I visited schools. Yesterday I visited Leavenworth High School. I think there's 380 kids in their graduating class. Last weekend when I was home, I visited South Cloud, which is Miltonvale. There's 3 kids in their graduating class. In a sense, a world of difference, but the same goals exist both places. It's very compelling. And the teacher shortage is evident really in both places, but especially in rural. How do you find a science teacher? Those things are challenging today. My point is that while the question to me is often, how do you make student debt more affordable? And there are programs for teachers who, for example, will teach in a rural setting in which there's debt forgiveness. But my point is an additional point into that is that we need to figure out why we're spending so much money to begin with. Perhaps it goes back to the healthcare conversation. Aren't there ways? And one of the ways, the reason I pointed out Miltonvale's high school is those kids are all taking classes at Cloud County Community College now, and they'll have 25 hours, 26 hours completed by the time they go to college, which shortens the period of time in which they're spending as much money as they do. Community college education is less expensive than a 4-year institution. Are we underemphasizing community colleges? So kind of my complaint to make it sound like I'm not just trying to cram everything into 3 years, but we take a lot of time away from school that I'm not sure is the best. And it comes from, I don't know why you said about whether people will be mad at you about the liberal arts. I wondered about farmers because we've always been told we have to have summer off now from school because we got to go home and harvest. Less so today than it used to be.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I got to get you away from all this other stuff here a minute.
Help me.
My name's John Darrow.
Hello, John.
I own my own trucking outfit. the federal government's implementing the new ELD system. And I have been doing some inquiries. Now, I called your office and talked to Austin in Washington.
Okay.
And he's told me that the bill is still in the House, that it has not came to the Senate. Okay, now they're implementing this on December 18th, that we've got to have all this stuff done. How can it become a law without making both houses?
Okay. What John is talking about is that, I don't know what the name of the agency is. I cover Federal
Motor Carriers.
Motor Carriers. That's always abbreviations in my world. And they're changing the rules for truckers. And it has to do with how they log. You can't use a paper book anymore.
Been using it for 45 years. We're going to a damn machine that tells you.
According to them, you got to do it electronically. This is to enforce the hours of service law. So the large trucking companies don't have much of a problem with this. Our small independent haulers do.
Well, and I'm in agriculture.
And agriculture in particular, because when you're hauling livestock, the question becomes, what do you do with cattle in the back of a truck when the hours of service expire and you're not any place that you're supposed to be?
Yep.
So here's a piece of news that you apparently don't know, but as of yesterday or the day before, the motor carriers announced a 90-day delay. So again, I'm not saying this solves your problem, but the concern about December the 18th becomes whatever that is, March the 18th or something, February the 18th, something. And so there is a breathing space. But it's not Congress that's told them to do this. They're doing it themselves. The legislation that's hung up in the House is to fix this problem, particularly as it relates, and delay a year, a full year, delay the issue of electronic logs for haulers of animals, for livestock and fish.
Okay, but if you read the law, what they've got on web, somebody wrote that law that has no idea what a truck is. And it will not work in the agriculture field. So what the federal government is allowing them to do is put us little guys out of business. Because I put it cost me $1,000 for this thing. Plus I got to pay $40 a month to have somebody look at it.
Okay.
Or supervise it. Now, when I run ag, you know, they've got exemptions. Who can be exempted from it and who can't? You can run 150 miles. At the 151st mile, you have to start logging, but you have to sit and wait 10 hours. This thing is not going to work. All it's going to do is put people out of business.
I am the lead Republican with Heidi Heitkamp, a Democrat senator from North Dakota. We're working together to get a full year delay to the implementation of this by the motor carriers so that we have time to get this stuff figured out before it puts you out of business. And it does always bother me that, I mean, it does bother me in this circumstance that, and I've seen this in other instances, where large business, they can more easily comply, but they don't defend you because they may not care whether you're in business. Didn't say that this way. I could say.
They might hope he's not in business.
Correct. You're more direct than I was. So you and other livestock haulers have my attention. We were successful in getting a 90-day delay. I don't think that would happen except for the agitation that you and others have put on us. And now the question is, can we get a further delay, a full year, and then to actually fix the problem?
Well, then the other question I have too is here, the government has given farmers, okay, just gonna piss a few people off. You give the farmers the right to drive the truck without a CDL, without a medical card. You know, they hire people to help harvest, which I understand they need it. But as soon as harvest is over, them farmers don't want to lose them people. So they hire out for hire.
Competing with you.
They're competing, but they're not.
But they don't have the same standards that you
Yeah,
have.
they don't have, they've got a county tag instead of a commercial tag. They don't pay none of the highway heavy use tax. They're not paying IFTA. They're not paying everything, but yet they're going to the elevators that are hauling for hire, and they're dropping the rates down just to have somebody, you know, to haul it.
You've taken me from a problem I'm working to solve to a problem that's more difficult to solve, but thanks for bringing it to my attention.
But I mean, it's come from the government, because I've been pulled over, you know, I get inspected. I asked the DOT cops, well, how come you're not inspecting these grain haulers that are, you know, loaded from top to end? And they said that they had a memo from Brownback telling the DOT not to mess with the farmers. They're just trying to get their grain to market.
What you're telling me is that it may not be the farmer's grain they're hauling.
Correct.
Okay. All right, it registered.
Yeah, and they're not paying fuel taxes. They're not paying nothing we're paying.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, sir?
Another thing, this isn't when I raised my hand, but just a quick comment on his deal. I truly believe a lot of this probably is coming from the technology world that's got a market lined up to sell him that tablet every 2 years or 3 years, and it'll become obsolete. He can't even get a battery to run it, and he'll have to spend another $1,000 every 2 years to buy a new one.
It's hooked up to the ECM in the truck.
So it's like my Verizon phone, you know, it's worked fine for a couple of years, I need a new battery. Verizon wants you to sell you a new phone, they won't sell you a new battery. It's planned obsolescence, and I'll bet there's some connection to the technology world.
We have a complaint.
More than just safety issue and compliance. I'll bet there's some other deals to come into that, but that isn't why I
It
raised
all
my
drops
hand.
back to money.
Right.
Who's getting
But that
the
isn't
money?
why I raised my hand. The healthcare deal, until the medical system gets paid to stay in existence for preventive health care, instead of just making money on surgeries and the big deals when it gets beyond preventable work. We need to devise a system where the healthcare systems gets paid to keep you from major deals, and we could reduce the cost of healthcare for everybody tremendously. Because diabetes and blood pressure and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and all this is going to eat our lunch down the road even more than it's eating our lunch now. And if the medical system got paid so much every month or quarter or year to do things and work with the people to not get to where they had that big stuff, I think that's how to solve the health care cost in the future.
Thank you. The Moran 10-point plan. One of those, in fact, the biggest bang for our buck is wellness, fitness, diet, nutrition. Has a lot to do with personal responsibility, some to do with government, I suppose, but it is the driver of reducing healthcare costs is prevention, wellness.
So
as I
how
said.
can we get back to the days of Bob Dole, Tip O'Neill, and these different parties could actually speak to each other civilly, have
Yes.
a cup of coffee or a beer, and solve some of this stuff without it Republican, Democrat, Independent, this. We've come so lack of civility in the political system that I'm really scared that even if this person and this different party, they agreed on something, but well, it's his party's idea, and I like it, but I can't vote for it because I'm supporting his party. Somehow or another, we've got to get past this.
I will. I will say contradictory things on this topic. One, I don't think it's as bad as it appears. The media loves the fight, so what you see mostly is the fight. But just as we're talking with John about this issue of trucker safety, and Heidi Heitkamp, a Democrat from North Dakota, and Jerry Moran, a Republican from Kansas, are working together to try to fix this problem. Almost every piece of legislation that I've introduced that I'm serious about becoming law will find a Democrat to co-sponsor it. We'll draft the bill in a way that makes that happen, and then we go to work trying to get it accomplished. The places that we've had the most difficulty is in the big issues that are perhaps the most important, or the ones that are important to the most people. And taxes and health care is front and center at the moment, and that hasn't worked so well. I often think, and I know my audience, I often think that when we talk about why can't you be bipartisan, people are blaming Republicans. That's fine, but the point also is that I would make, well, you're fine to do that, because my point I would make is people here today have asked us to do this in a bipartisan way. The question becomes is, do the Democrats on taxes, want Republicans to fail so that the Republicans look worse going into the elections and the Democrats look better? The general tendency is because Republicans are trying to do this with 51 votes, that we're to blame. I would say at least start out trying to do something, all of us, and then see where we are. The question is, will Democrats cooperate? And my guess is, just like in Republicans, some will, some won't. The question is, how are they trying to position themselves into the next election? Do they want to have success and draft a tax bill that's better for more people? Or do they want to say Republicans failed, they didn't get it passed? And I don't know that this is true, but this is the way they analyze it in Washington, D.C. And I say this only to, not to cause a debate about Republicans versus Democrats, but the analysis is, and I hear this all the time by people who write stories in Washington, D.C., by journalists, there will be not a single vote for the tax plan until Republicans get 51, and then a dozen will vote for it. The point being is that they would prefer that it fail for the image or political benefit that comes from that, but if it's going to pass, then they don't want to be left out. That's not the way that we ought to be making these decisions. And I would also tell you that particularly during President Obama's days, half the people, and I would guess there's truth in this audience, would call the office and say, you tell Moran not to budge 1 inch, don't give in on anything. The other half of you would call and say, why can't Jerry work with his colleagues and get something done? So you do point, and rightfully so, I'm not trying to shift the burden away from Congress, but you point at Washington, D.C., and I will tell you, I see it in my life among Kansas constituents, in which there is those who say, don't you budge 1 inch, this is a war. My view is that every person's position is worthy of consideration. We're all made by the same creator, and they're worthy of my respect, and that people, whether they live in Vermont and have Bernie Sanders as their senator, or they live in Kansas and have me, we're all entitled to be represented. And our ideas ought to be presented and votes ought to be taken, and sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. And I want that to be the way the United States Senate works.
A lot of these issues, if you look at where the money's coming from to support things, I'll bet you money that tablet, they're wanting to get into the system for drivers, truck drivers. I'll bet there's some company that's got that made out and got it patented, and they're pushing somebody to bring that in the system, so every 2 years he has to buy a new $1,000 tablet.
I don't want to bring John back into this conversation, but
Warner and Swift and Snyder, they've been doing this for the government anyhow for the last 15 years.
Part of truck drivers will admit to me, and will generally admit, they're not following the rules today. Electronic records will cause that to be seen. And so the Motor Carriers Agency is insisting on electronic records. The problem is that you, as a trucker, can't really comply, particularly when hauling livestock, with these rules. So you have this conflict. They're trying to enforce the rules, and we have a problem not necessarily with enforcing the rules, but the rules aren't quite right.
And I could be wrong.
No, I could be wrong. Don't print that. I really am running out of time, and I need to be elsewhere at 1 o'clock, and I have 2 appointments here in Frankfurt with people who wanted to corner me. But if you'll let me, although if you don't let me, I still have to go anyway. But if you'll let me, let's do one more. Or,
I have
yes?
a quick question.
All right, quick question and then one more.
Okay. So I'm also from Manhattan, Kansas, a graduate student, and I don't want to let this go. So my colleague Caitlin here explained why the graduate student tax increase would be detrimental for those of us who are very important educators and researchers in the United States. I just want to know whether you would support a tax bill that was passed by the House that includes that sort of graduate student tax increase.
What I will say is what I've tried to say to a number of questions today is I will do everything I can to make sure that provision is not in there. Then I'll make a decision about the overall tax bill, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. But you've caught my attention, and what you tell me is at least to the surface, to me standing here in front of you, makes sense to me. I have a goal that you all You know, I don't talk about this in Kansas. I don't talk about this very much because it's not really a federal issue, it's a state issue. But one of the things I'd like to accomplish as a public official in this state is we are an agriculture state, we're a oil and gas state, we manufacture lots of airplanes, but I want this place to change and add at least one more pillar to the state's economy, and that's for kids who like science and mathematics and engineering and research to have a future, not just being educated here, but to have careers here. It's one of the reasons that we're very supportive of NBAF in Manhattan, because things will grow up around agricultural research there. It's one of the reasons that we're very supportive of NCI designation for the KU Cancer Center. It's one reason that we're pushing more federal work to Wichita State in engineering, because businesses will grow up and you'll have greater opportunities. This state will be a different place if we can find a different and improving place if we can find ways to make certain that those of you who have a skill set and an intellect that I don't have but admire and esteem have a career in our state. So I want us to have students who come here to go to school, pursue those kind of degrees, and I want when you're done to have a place in which you can pursue your career. The other aspect of that is we are very supportive of entrepreneurship, innovation, startups, computer science. In addition to having the science background that you're developing that could be utilized in Kansas, I want people who have an idea to be able to have a better shot at bringing it to market and create jobs. It's called the American dream. And I use that phrase over and over, but it creates an opportunity for people to pursue their dreams. And in the process of doing that, they create the American dream for other people who then work there. Yes, ma'am.
The Affordable Care Act cannot be repealed in whole. We know that. The 340B program that Curtis brought up is a good example. So is it possible to just say we're going to pull health care out of taxes and we're going to give it a 2-year moratorium? We're not going to talk about health care for 2 years. Is that possible?
I think that it's possible that health care is not part of the tax bill, so that's an easier question to answer. And there is no consensus on what to do. I don't think I'm changing the subject. Part of the problem is that Republicans have said repeal and replace. I'm speaking in general terms. I'm not trying to put words in people's mouths. Republicans say repeal and replace. Democrats say fix. We get into that. If we could just change the words, I don't know what the right words are, but couldn't we work together to solve problems associated with health care? That keeps us out of the corners in which Republicans say repeal and replace and Democrats say just fix it. Like, the words matter, and so a different kind of conversation than the one that seems to be there today, which puts everybody in the corner of the ring and never gets us in the middle. So, yes, maybe. There is no known plan to fix this.
You know, we're still reeling from the sequestration. So constant hits at every place we turn, whether it's electronic health record requirements, meaningful use changes, reimbursement to our swing bed programs. You have 3 hospital administrators here. We all have very diverse systems. Although we're within 30 miles of each other, probably in a triangle, we need just some time to sit still, let us get our systems in place with the rules that exist, and stop creating new ones, and let us see how that's going to hold out.
Certainly would be a nice thing.
Medicare will not survive the healthcare side if we continue down this path.
You should know that the proposal for disaster assistance in Florida and Texas and Puerto Rico, which I'm supportive of, the Office of Management and Budget's proposal is to extend the sequestration for domestic spending for 2 more years, which is what we've always worried about. Is if we can take a hit maybe for a little while, but if it lasts very long, we can't. And just time runs together. Last night or this morning, I emailed my staff to say I can't envision any circumstance in which I'm going to be voting to continue sequestration, which I didn't vote for in the first place and don't support, for 2 more years because of a number of things, but in large part what it means to critical access hospitals. When the Budget Control Act was approved and sequestration came into place, I didn't believe it affected providers who were getting, quote, cost-based reimbursement. It did. And some of you come to me on the Medicaid expansion. You all have the opportunity to debate that issue in Topeka. my point has always been, I got my own work cut out for us because the 2% across the board cut is more damaging. Its loss is greater than the increase that would occur with Medicaid expansion. So we spent a lot of time on Medicaid expansion, fine. It's a reminder to me there's an even bigger problem when it comes to the access to health care in rural places. And as you know, this is very personal with me. My parents lived until their 90s. My dad 98, my mom 94 in their hometown, and that would not have happened but for the fact we had a good set of doctors and a quality hospital. And in the absence of that, my sister and I would have had conversations with my parents telling you, Mom, Dad, I'm sorry, you need to move. And in our case, probably Hayes, but wherever it would have been, it would not have been the place that they were actually able to live surrounded by people they knew and cared about them, and people who checked in on them so they actually could live in their home until they reached the age of 98. This is, it's like healthcare. I told you that people come to me and the tears start flowing. These decisions are very personal to people, and how our experiences that we have in our own lives and families change the way we look at things. And I understand that. And this access to healthcare in communities across Kansas, those 127 hospitals are a bit like children to me. We want them to be around because we know in the absence, your community will not be what it is today if you're not there. We lose our healthcare system, we lose a lot of what Kansas is like. All right.
Let's be clear though, I mean, you know, we can talk about, we can tease out the different aspects of, you know, the state of healthcare and public health in Kansas right now. We're talking about, yeah, of course, if there's no rural hospitals there, then health insurance may not really make that much difference, right? But the fact of the matter is, it's not either or, right? We're not talking about, you know, whether or not we're going to choose to increase access to healthcare, affordable quality healthcare for people, or whether or not we're going to preserve and create, you know, rural hospitals. And as far as the costs of healthcare go, having people insured saves us money, right? If people aren't insured, they're going to the ER, which is way more expensive than just going in for, you know, regular routine checkups. And there is nothing in this tax bill that is also going to repeal, you know, parts of the Affordable Care Act that is going to make that any more affordable or accessible to people.
The only two caveats to what you say is, one, and I don't think you meant it this way, but you can say the more people that are insured, the more stable our healthcare delivery system is. I only would highlight again, the Affordable Care Act created insurance plans that people can't afford, and secondly, the hospitals can't afford to accept their co-payments and deductibles. So there isn't.
And again, the tax bill is not.
It may not be the solution to that, but I'm just saying that any plan doesn't solve. It's the debate about it. You say it's not all or anything, and that's my point too. It's not no provision of the Affordable Care Act versus, I mean, it's not one versus nothing. Is there something that we can find that addresses more problems, not less?
There totally is, but it's not in this tax bill, is it? And if this has come out of your mouth dozens of times at this point, and the only thing that you haven't said is that you are going to vote against this bill. So it's hard for me to imagine any reason why you would vote for it.
The other caveat
Absolutely.
is a way to address people in difficult circumstances in regard to affordability of health care, Moran 10-point plan, increase our support for community health centers that provide health care services to people who, in their circumstance, can't afford insurance or can't afford health care. I gotta quit.
You do? Yeah, just don't vote no.
Thank you all very much for the conversation.